I'm Jason Johnson in for Joy Reid, and we begin tonight with another volatile day in the $250 million civil fraud trial against the Trump crime family and their company. Today, a New York judge ruled that a limited gag order on Donald Trump should also apply to his attorneys after he said they made inappropriate remarks about his principal law clerk. Judge Arthur Engoron's order said that Christopher Kise, Robert, and Alina Habba, lawyers for the former president and his adult sons, are, quote, prohibited from making any public statements in or out of court that refer to any confidential communications in any form between my staff and me. That is legalese for keep my name and my staff's name out your mouth. Failure to abide by this directive shall result in serious sanctions, Engoron warned. The ruling came after Eric Trump returned for a second day of testimony in the civil fraud suit. Eric acknowledged that he was aware of the Trump Organization's statements of financial condition as far back as 2013, 10 years ago, after repeatedly denying knowledge of them. After court adjourned, he ripped State Attorney Letitia James to reporters, taking lines straight from his father's racist playbook.
What New York State's trying to do with my father is truly awful. I've never seen anything like it. We have an unbelievable company. We have some of the best assets anywhere in the world. They've dragged Don and I and Ivanka into it as collateral damage. They only want our names in this thing because it sensationalizes their case. We've done absolutely nothing wrong. We have a better company than they could have ever imagined.
Letitia James' office has argued that Trump's children participated in a scheme to falsely inflate their company's assets to secure more favorable loans and insurance policies. Remember, the judge has already found that Donald Trump and his two sons engaged in persistent fraud. This trial will determine what financial fines or other punishments Trump will face. That's it. It's the case that hits closest to home, and not just because it involves Trump's kids. It targets Trump's entire image, built over decades as a symbol of wealth and power. So expect to see hot flashes of Trumpian anger in the coming days. Donald Trump, as well as his daughter Ivanka Trump, are expected to testify next week. Joining me now is NBC's Adam Rees, who was in the courtroom today. Adam, great to talk to you. I'm going to ask you this up front, because this is the thing that gets me about some of these trials, certainly with Eric Jr. What is he attempting to do here? Because it seems like he doesn't understand that he's already been found guilty. It seems like he's trying to relitigate something that's already been taken care of.
Yeah, you're right, Jason. It really has been sort of a tale of two brothers, Eric being one of them, Don Jr. the other. Don Jr., 45 years old, the elder brother, much more comfortable on the stand, amiable, cracking jokes with the judge, having a banter with the prosecutor, but sticking to his story, which is he relied on the attorneys and the accountants and his CPA. But as you mentioned, Eric is an entirely different story. Eric's testimony last 2 days, very fraught, very contentious. He doesn't remember a lot of things. He says, you know, I pour concrete. I am a developer. I'm a real estate guy. I am way, way above all of these intricate details of the finances. But he really got caught up in the details and in the evidence, the documents, the emails, the signatures. His signature is on so many documents. And there were gotcha moments. He changed his story numerous times. First, he didn't know about these statements of financial condition. Then he said, well, maybe there were some, but I really didn't have anything to do with it. And then at the end, he said, you know what? Yes, that does look familiar, but it really underestimates my father's wealth. He and his brother walked out of the courtroom, both of them thumbs up. But I must say, the judge is probably going to give them a thumbs down.
Adam Rees, thank you so much for laying that out and starting us off tonight on The ReidOut. Let's bring in Glenn Kirshner and Charles Coleman Jr. Both are former federal prosecutors and MSNBC legal analysts. Glenn, I'll start with you. As much as I love this sort of Kendall and Roman thing that they've got going on when they go to trial here, it seems to me like I can't tell if this is a strategy or it's just that Eric Trump doesn't know any better. Or do you think that there is some sort of larger plan with the Trump brothers where one's like, I'm going to play the jerk and you're going to play the guy who's slightly more sophisticated? Are they hoping that will change the penalties and fines that they face, or are they just sort of acting into their personalities?
Yeah, you know, Jason, nobody will accuse these characters of being tactical geniuses, because what they should have done is just plead the fifth and go home. Listen, as you already pointed out, Judge Engoron has already ruled against Trump and company on liability. And now the question is, how much will they have to disgorge? In other words, how much of the ill-gotten gains that, that they have courtesy of their fraud should they have to give back? But the other thing in the mix here is, will they be prohibited essentially from doing business in New York in the future? So all I can figure is they think maybe they can talk their way out of being prohibited from continuing to, work as part of the New York business world. I have a hard time believing Judge Engoron is going to fall for any of this nonsense when somebody like Don Jr. testifies that, yes, I was the certifying official. Yes, I signed my name on that document certifying that it was accurate. But I had no idea if it was accurate or not because my accountants were really the bad guys. So were you crooked, or were you just so incredibly, grossly incompetent and you just didn't care? Neither one of them makes for a particularly good New York businessman.
Charles, I take it to this, continuing with our sort of succession metaphor here. So we've already talked about Kendall and Roman. Now let's talk about Shiv, Ivanka. So Ivanka Trump, the court just rejected her desire to avoid testimony because she said she is too busy to testify during the school week. And they basically said that's nonsense. You still have to come in, even though she claimed that she would be suffering undue hardship. My question for you is, one, under what circumstances would that argument have ever actually worked? And two, if you look at the three children in the Trump organization, which is the one who is the most likely to cause the most damage? Is it Don? Is it Ivanka? Which one of them is most likely to cause the most damage as far as possibly raising the amount of fines, fees, or penalties that they could face?
Well, Jason, to your first question, the notion of not being able to testify on the basis of a hardship exception is going to require a very high standard in terms of you meeting that bar. And Ivanka Trump basically saying, hey, look, I got to get my kids from school for one day of testimony is not going to meet that. Usually you're talking about people who have extenuating circumstances, who are outside of the jurisdiction and for whom it would be a serious burden to get to court and to testify. And I might add, who are not essential witnesses. And so all of those things are going to be factors that play into whether a judge makes the decision as to whether to let you off the hook from testifying, along with the length of your testimony. For one day in a jurisdiction you already reside in, for the reasons that you've offered, you're not seriously medically ill, something you can't come to court, you're not immobile, for example, or incapacitated for any other reason, that's not going to meet the standard that would allow a judge to excuse you from court and your testimony. Now, to your second question, I'm going to argue that Eric Trump is probably the one who's going to do the most damage with respect to this case. Don Jr. has a very particular role because he was named as a trustee for the irrevocable trust once Donald Trump became president. But it's Eric who's had the most consistent presence as part of being a part of the Trump organization. His name is on a lot of the documents. His name and his presence sort of looms largely over the organization in comparison to any of his kids. And so that's the thing that I think Don and Eric and Ivanka and Donald Trump need to be most concerned about is Eric and his testimony, which is why, in part, I believe he was so adversarial when he was on the stand testifying.
Glenn, talk about adversarial. So the Trump team has decided that they're going to just keep going after law clerks and staff members and everything else like that. Look, they've done this all along. It's not like that's new behavior from Donald Trump. It's not like that's new behavior from anybody associated with him. But I have to ask you, look, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. I've seen plenty of legal shows, though. What on earth could be the possible use of angering a judge by attacking their staff? Do they think this is going to result in a delay? Do they think that they're going to anger this judge so much, and Gorin, that he'll make a mistake and they can justify calling for a mistrial? What is the purpose of Trump's team attacking his clerks?
Your guess is as good as mine, but I have a feeling they're using it as a distraction. They would rather people be talking about and us covering, this feud that's going on between the Trumps and Trump's attorney and the judge's law clerk, than talking about the rampant fraud that was going on, in the Trump organization, and how much they are going to be made to pay. And the other thing, if I can circle back to a minute, I think Ivanka is a real potential danger because, one, she's trying so desperately not to testify. That seems to be something of a red flag. But even more importantly, think back to the January 6th public hearings. When she testified, we saw the video of her behind closed doors testimony. She said, in substance, I don't believe my father's claim of fraud undermining the election. I believe Bill Barr. Boy, that was sort of Ivanka introducing her father to the undercarriage of a bus. So it may very well be that she's so desperately trying to stay out of that courtroom because if she testifies truthfully, it's really going to hurt Dad and her brothers.